Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We are on conference call number 11, which is Keeping Deals Together. I've got Chris Somerville here so he can keep me in line, make sure I can get questions answered. I appreciate your support and help on all these calls, Chris. I also have Shannon on the line as well. So if you do have a question or comment, you can ask her. Mute my participants here. Let's see. Shannon, if you could mute the people that joined, that would be great. Awesome.
Okay, cool.
We'll go ahead and get started with a full plate of things to cover tonight. We're going to cover how to keep deals together. And if you look at all the transactions that we have currently at Best Choice Realty, and you compare it to other real estate companies, there are numbers that would really alarm you. And the number is really sad, actually, that there's over 30% of all the deals that are written or under contract that are at risk of canceling. So when you kind of put that into perspective and realize that, you have almost a 1 out of 4 chance that your deal is going to cancel, you might treat your clients differently. You might come up with different strategies, and you'll look at the contract much differently than you have in the past when you know that 30% of all the deals are at risk of cancellation. So tonight we're going to talk about how to understand remorse, maybe some strategies on how to prevent it from happening, and then some contract strategies or time savers that may help you. And Chris, at any point in time, if you want to jump in, be my guest. You've seen some of the deals fall apart as we go through. So the number one thing on remorse is that you need to think about your buyer, and if you need to, when you're in contract, you almost have to redo your buyer consultation if you feel like they're going sideways. Sometimes I found that the husband is on board or the wife is on board, and then one of the parties is just not feeling connected to the contract. Maybe they're nervous about the process. And so it's sitting down and maybe doing another buyer consultation with them so you can properly set expectation about what's to come. I find that most of the fear and the remorse that comes, I want to back out of the deal after we get it accepted, comes because I did not do a good job of bringing the parties together and understanding the process. So if you didn't do that initially, maybe you were going too fast, you were kind of in a multiple offer situation, which happens a lot now in certain areas, and they got excited, and then all of a sudden one of the parties felt like it's kind of like the letdown effect, where they get excited and then all of a sudden they got it, and it's that stress or that anxiety that kind of creeps in. And if you don't set a good job of expectations about, when we do find one, you'll have this feeling like kind of an overwhelmed or anxious feeling. At any point in time, call me and we'll walk you through the process. You want to have that kind of open dialogue because it happens and it's real that people will back out just because they're just overwhelmed. Buyer's remorse comes because the buyer doubts his or her choices. They have doubts about whether they can handle change. I'm a change junkie. I love change. I love it. I don't know about you, Chris. Do you love change? I mean, you have to embrace change because the marketplace is moving very fast. And so you've got to be able to handle change well, but most of our clients, in fact, over half of them don't like change. That's the statistic that I found once when it had to personality profiles and profiling your client. Over half of them are either really sensitive, caring, people that really handle details, or they're married to somebody that's very analytical, and that's not our profession in general. Most of real estate agents they love change, they handle adaptation really well, they love to go out and look at properties and negotiation, they love people. That is not typically the buyers. Over half of them can be more resistant to that. So make sure that you understand what kind of buyer you're working with and how to handle those types of situations. If you're not going to deal with that situation and you let it fester, or you let it become bigger than what it really needs to, it most likely will result in a cancellation. So start to head that off a little earlier than you would in the past if you struggle with deals falling apart on you. A lot of buyers we found with remorse they doubt whether it's the right time to buy. And that's part confuses me. I can't believe people don't understand it's a good time to buy when the rates are as low as they are, but they still doubt that it's the right time to buy. They speculate maybe that the prices will drop, that the market will change, that the interest rates will change. I don't think they're going down like into the threes. I have not even seen reports on that. I've only seen reports on interest rates going up. So focus on the positive with a lot of these people. If you find that a lack of participation is happening between one or more people in the transaction or making the decision, that also is at a very high risk of cancellation. So if you find that maybe you're having really good communication with the wife, but you're not having much communication, if any, from the husband, there is a lack of participation that also would be flagged on a file for us or for you on perhaps that deal maybe falling out or falling apart on you. So get a good handle of that early. Try to involve all of the parties. Chris, when you are working with clients, when you're signing them, what kind of things could you do to get people to be more involved in the process? You know, if there's a husband and wife and one you could see as more actively engaged than the other, what are some things that you could do?
Are we talking after we get to the signing table?
Yeah, after we get to the signing table and they're kind of nervous,
well,
anxious.
Okay, yeah. One of the things that I would always suggest, I see a lot of successful brokers when it's possible. Loan officers do this as well, is attend the signings. I mean, that would be one thing that would be a really great suggestion, especially if you feel like one or more of the participants might be a bit of a wobbler, is what I like to call it. So, be there to be able to, kind of hold their hand. And then a seasoned closer or notary is going to see if there are some issues and kind of read the body language of the sellers or the buyers that are coming in, or the buyers specifically kind of coming in, right, and making sure that they're including everybody and speaking with everybody. I think that this all begins with great listening up front and making sure that you're putting them in the right house that's right for them, and then ushering them along and then letting them know what the expectations are when they come to sign, and get some commitments from them before they even get to the signing table that they're prepared and that they're ready to go. And if they have any questions, be open to asking rather than just signing off things they don't understand. So,
right. Well, and I'm glad you brought up getting face-to-face with people, Chris, because I think that that's an area where maybe that's the reason why there's such a rise in the deals at having risk of cancellation or buyer's remorse, because I think in our business, we are seeing more and more of you, which is great for us using technology and having electronic signature. But I think you lose that human connection a bit when you use Authentisign to sign something, where if you go and meet with them and you explain what they're signing, that actually bodes very well. So be careful on when you're using Authentisign, and maybe when you should go and actually physically meet with them to get their signing on the mutual or on the inspection negotiation. There's that point in time which is really critical, and it's usually at the very beginning when you find the house for them. But it also happens, they can have buyer's remorse usually during that inspection window. So, instead of sitting down and just doing it on Authentisign at 10 o'clock at night with a buyer that maybe has resistant to change or has some of these tendencies, you may want to make an appointment and actually physically sit down with them and explain that process, or explain why it was done that way, or why the inspector called it out a certain way. There's something to be said about that face-to-face contact that I think is important to point out at this point in the game. So thank you.
And Rochelle, I would just kind of add, just to kind of tag along on that, I think everybody should really be considering the future of the industry and where it's going, and making sure that you're humanizing your business and having as much direct communication, because ultimately the competition is going to come from the transaction-based that are selling price. And quite honestly, I think that if you humanize your business and spend as much eyeball-to-eyeball time with your clients, the better opportunities you'll have on referrals in the future as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why that's an important part of the transaction process.
Yeah, I mean, there's one that I just went to, Chris. I mean, he's going through a lot right now, and the inspection's really brutal. And I just spent the time. You guys know I'm really busy, but I spent good over an hour just asking questions about the move and like, where are they moving to? And how is that going? How's the job search going? And those types of connections would not have been done if I was on the phone and I was just sending him the 35R to sign through Authentisign. That would never have happened. I would never have known, how the job, it's a struggle for him. He doesn't even know where he's going to be living. And he's living with friends and family right now. I mean, that kind of stuff, it really puts it into perspective for the transaction. And then I can obviously help him get to the finish line. But if I didn't spend the time with him, he may have had a hard time going in to sign his final paperwork at escrow.
Yeah.
So those types of things you want to head on early. If you feel like the deal is starting to unravel, do the FaceTime. Those would be my recommendation.
Yeah. And I think things that are done out of a broker's convenience are obvious to the client potentially. And so it's that convenience and technology is great, but only if it's serving the buyer or the seller, not the broker.
Right. Let's move on to the ways to prevent, and when you're talking about buyer's remorse or cancellations that come into play when we're talking about the inspection contingency. We talked about it in great detail last week, but I think it begs another point, especially when it comes to septic and well and other types of unique situations. The ways to prevent inspections is to have you ever experienced a client who has a lot of list of repairs? I've been on the receiving end of that, and I always think they just have a really bad real estate broker, and I come at it that way. So how did you handle yourself when you were the listing agent and that buyer's agent asked for a laundry list of repairs? Did you counsel with your client? Did you really spend the time understanding the report? Was the buyer there during the inspection or at the very end so that at least they could be briefed during the inspection period? If you're not doing some of those extra things, that will maybe help you if you're finding that the buyers are changing their mind or asking for a laundry list. If they're actually physically there at the inspection or can speak with the inspector directly, it's so frustrating for me when a buyer doesn't make the time to go to an inspection and then they get the report and then we spend 2 hours on the phone going over the report and the picture's blown out of proportion and you think this little siding that has like a crack is this major crack and you end up doing more work than you need to. So I would say my best rule or best practice would be make sure your buyers are attending. I like to have my buyers attend the last, I would say 30 minutes to an hour of the inspection. That would be my best rule of thumb that I've found works well in my business and has in the past 20 years. It gives the inspector time to get settled, spend the time to really do a good job, not have the buyer kind of following them along. I find inspectors are more thorough when they're not having the buyer tag along with them the entire time, but then they do like to have the time to summarize and go through the report with the buyers. I find that works really well. And that often sets me up for success when I'm trying to negotiate what's really important to the buyers. When I see how they react to the inspector and how they kind of posture themselves. So that would be my best rule or best kind of advice to you on how to handle inspections. Of course, they can hire their own inspector. Of course, they can walk through the entire inspection with the inspector, but to keep things, handled and in perspective, that would be my best takeaway on that. Help the client understand that the inspector is going to find as many things possible that's wrong with the house. So set them up for a laundry list of things. Let them know that inspector usually will call things, they don't check out the furnace. So usually the furnace comes up. The carbon monoxide detectors usually come up. The water heater straps usually come up. Let's set them up for that. Usually they'll call, even if the grass or the shrubberies around the house are, close to the perimeter, they'll call that out. So kind of head those things up, always caulking. I don't think there's been a house that I've ever sold that has had a perfect caulking job. Maybe a few. Even builders, I've found that caulking is not done properly. The inspector will call that out. So, set those up for, set the expectations that there will be things that the inspector is going to find. There is not a perfect house out there. And then that kind of sets their mind up ready to receive the information that the inspector will give. Your job as the real estate broker is really not to be the inspector and identify what's wrong with the property. Your job at this stage of the game is to reassure and communicate and keep the client informed about the process of how the negotiation will move forward. So I have too many agents that I talk to, I saw this and the inspector didn't catch this, and it was kind of like, he said this and I said that. You know what? Step away from that part. Let the inspector do their job. Your job is to reassure and to communicate and to keep the client informed about their rights and the way that they can negotiate some of these things. You also want to think about your timing. I look at the timing. We talked about this last week when it came to like the 35R and when to send it. Don't wait to the very last moment. Keep things moving along nicely. That way, if you need to ask for an extension, you can do so, and you're going to have less resistance by the other side. But, you do have to watch your timing and make sure you don't miss those cutoffs. I'm not sitting there in your home office advising you on what to do and how to do it. You'll want to make sure you reach out to me if you're unsure about the timing. And always, if you're going to try to keep the deal together, you need to make it a win-win and negotiate properly in an email. So you should be having some good email strategies. I talked about that last week. A transaction assistant is also very helpful if you feel like you're doing so much and not communicating well with your clients and you're finding buyers are falling through. I know some of you on the call have taken my advice and gotten a transaction coordinator to help you. That can take a lot of relief, because what that transaction coordinator will do for the money that they're earning, they're licensed transaction coordinators that we've vetted through. If I don't have the time to, put everything down on paper and can properly communicate with the buyers, having a transaction coordinator, if you pay that person $350, they can be the messenger of all of the different checkpoints along the way and reassure the client and 35R and communicate, here's where we're at. It will basically be an asset to your business rather than you trying to always miss those deadlines or those cutoffs or kind of scrambling at the last minute. If you find yourself doing that throughout the transaction, I don't know if Cheryl is on the call tonight, but Cheryl McLaren, one of our top producers, she just, once I got her hooked up with a transaction coordinator, she has not looked back. It's the best $350 she spends on a transaction, because she can basically put that person on her team and they communicate in the same way, if not better than the way Cheryl would communicate about some of these checkpoints. Also, make sure that you are exposing your client. This is some of my key takeaways. Your contract strategies or time savers for you in keeping your deals together. Expose your client to the seller's disclosure. So if you're kind of like, I'm just kind of lackadaisical, I throw that, seller's disclosure, I don't really expose my client at the right time to the seller's disclosure, you're missing out an opportunity, because a lot of things can be dealt with before the inspector even goes out to the property. So if you give the client the disclosures, you may want to remind them to read through it and prepare or have their inspector selected based on the responses of the seller. Your informal observations as you're going through the property, your knowledge base can come into really good and handy. You can build more trust with your buyer, such as, I know the difference between, what are recalled electrical panels and what are not recalled panels. So if you know that ahead of time, sometimes you can offset that coming up on the inspector's report by negotiating for that to be taken care of. Also reminding your clients that we're beating them up on price, or we're not beating them up on price. We're going to beat them up once we do the inspection, but it's based on real numbers. I've done a CMA or I've done a market analysis of the property that you're purchasing, and based on my CMA or the market knowledge that I have, they've priced the home to sell, or they priced their home under market to get multiple offers, and therefore we're going to need to be very, very diligent in what we're asking for, either in our offer or in our inspection response, so that we're asking for the things that are health, safety, or hazards that would jeopardize or affect the value of the property that you're paying. So we need to kind of look at that when we're discussing strategy with our buyers. Also, you want to think about your earnest money. I think some of you maybe are, I hate to pick on you, I'm older, and I've been in the business long enough to know when earnest monies were quite low. In fact, I remember in Pierce County and in Lewis County and in Thurston County, where we would write $500 earnest money checks, and that was the norm. So gone are the days when the earnest money checks were really, really low. Earnest money really is showing how serious your buyer is. And one strategy that I've used to really keep the buyer connected to the property and not have wandering eyes would be to increase their earnest money. It shows how serious they are, and it shows the seller your seriousness as well. So if you're feeling like my deals are falling apart more than they need to, you may want to start getting in a better practice of explaining what earnest money is and suggesting, and you can do this very nicely, suggesting what earnest monies we are seeing on contracts. Earnest money is around 1%, but we're seeing as high as 3 to 5% in a multiple offer situation. So I would recommend, showing the seller you're serious, and here's the amount that I would recommend. Of course, it's your decision, but here's what I would recommend. What I found earlier on in the 90s is that we would just write $500 and just put it on the contract, and there was no discussion. Now I'm seeing that the buyers are having more discussion around earnest money on what we see typically, and there's nothing wrong with you saying, we are seeing at Best Choice Realty at least a 1% earnest money check coming into our firm or coming to the escrow company. In multiple offers, we're seeing 3 to 5%. So that's something you can use in your dialogue with your clients. And don't forget that you have the ability to get a home warranty. There are home warranty companies that will save a lot of hassle where, you have a seller who's not wanting to budge on price or terms, and they're very, very stubborn, but you have a listing agent who doesn't want to have the hassle of the buyers moving in or the sellers being dealt with some issues with their property or their appliances after the close of escrow. And oftentimes with proper negotiation, you can often have the seller purchase a home warranty, or a listing agent throw in a home warranty that will help your buyer once they move in, cover for basic things that might fall apart, or appliances. We just have one right now where the microwave, it's a week before closing and the microwave's not working. So again, we could pay the service fee of $65. The technician would go out and they'll either fix or replace the unit so that the new buyer doesn't have to worry about that. That could be a hassle that we are dealing with. It could set you back in time. Also frustrate the seller, especially when they're moving and they're getting boxes. I mean, the guy's pretty much moved out of the home today, and now we have a microwave we have to deal with. So, he was just like thanking me left and right for a home warranty that I threw into the mix. And the home warranty doesn't cost more than $450. I haven't seen a home warranty more than that in a long time. I think the home warranty I paid for that covers the microwave is only $280. So it's anywhere from $280 to about $450 is what I'm seeing on home warranties, and that can save your deal if you're in a sticky situation. Chris, do you have anything else to add on home warranty, or any recommendations that you've seen with home warranties or earnest money?
No, I thought what you were mentioning about all that was right on par. I think that the increase, or the potential increase in earnest money, is going to incentivize the seller, and it also creates skin in the game for the buyer, and both of those things are saying seriousness to both parties. So I think that was great advice, and the warranty stuff was right on par too as well.
All right, cool. So let's jump in real quick. I've got 5 more minutes. I love it. I have a little bit of extra time. I was hoping I would tonight. I want to show you guys the septic contingency, because I think a lot of you are confused about septic. And they are changing some of the forms in some of the counties. So look for that in the next 30 to 60 days. But there are some things I want to bring up that's important for you guys to see. So if you go to Express Forms, all the forms are still loaded here. They haven't removed this from our queue. And there's going to be a different county. There's a septic contingency for King County and a septic contingency for Pierce County. Snohomish County, we're still using the 22S, but they will probably change that, I would think, in the coming year. I hope that they get that done. But King County, there's differences between Thurston, King, and Pierce. So make sure number one, you have the right county form that you're dealing with. Let's look at the King County, since we have that up on the screen. The King County addendum you should be using, and it does say on here that the seller warrants that the septic system is functioning. If you are not, so let's see, I'm going to get that up on the screen. It's not going for some reason. I have to have Shannon help me here. The county forms on the Pierce County septic county system. If I scroll down to the very bottom, you can see that there is a website for the septic systems for Pierce County, general information, and there's a forms and applications for Pierce County septic systems. Pierce County has a very strict rules because there are so many homes or properties that are on septic. They actually inspect, and you have to allow for enough time. So if you're a listing agent and you're listing a property in Pierce County that has a septic system, you have to go through the proper steps. And I would recommend doing that before you even list the property. King County, it is a requirement to have it pumped. Now, it doesn't have to be inspected by the county. Pierce County requires that. But King County does require the seller to acknowledge that they don't have any problems with it and that is in working order and that they would pump it. So there are stark differences between each county and how they handle the septic systems. For some reason, let's see if I can get it to go. Here we go. Open. So I'm going to pull up King County right now. A lot of you have kind of confused about King County's system, and I want to go through that real quick with you tonight. I've got 5 minutes, so I've got enough time. But see, this addendum supersedes any other provisions. So if you're dealing with a bank-owned or short sale bankruptcy, again, oftentimes they are going to make as-is language that's going to override this. But if you're dealing with a normal septic system in King County, you do want to include the King County septic addendum. If you're dealing with Pierce, there's a Pierce County addendum. If you're dealing with Thurston, there's a Thurston County one. Each county is going to have their own way of handling this. If they don't have a county addendum, such as I think Kitsap does not have their addendum, you would use a 22S, or in Snohomish County, a 22S, until they get their county form uploaded. It says the type of the system, the seller's representations, like I discussed earlier. Then it has this health code. The seller will retain an OSM, an on-site manager, to monitor and perform an inspection to make sure it meets code. In King County, I was representing a seller, and this happened just about 6 months ago, where the septic company I hired monitored and determined that there was something wrong with the septic system. We were already past it. It was Redfin was buying it. The Redfin buyer's agent got the report. The seller, I gave them the opportunity to actually, did they want us to fix it? It was about a $6,500 repair, or did they want to connect to sewer? I couldn't believe the buyer chose for us to fix it because it was an old septic system when they could connect to the sewer for not very much. It was like $15,000 to connect to the sewer line. I think it was crazy of the buyer to be educated by this Redfin agent, and I won't name her name, but to name her she went back to the buyer and said, oh, let's just have the seller fix it. When I had knowledge and she had knowledge that it wouldn't have cost much more than $5,000 or $6,000 more for them to connect to the sewer. So again, this is really important that you know if you're dealing with a septic system, you should probably research enough to know about what's the code, what is typical, and when you have a situation like that, you may want to get more knowledge by calling me, because I've dealt with situations where septic systems have not worked or a close of escrow has occurred and the septic system has issues. There's a reason why we use this addendum. So it tells who's responsible. And then there's a box here, and if the box is not checked, then the seller does not have to pump it. So if you're representing a buyer, you want to make sure that you check the box number 4. This would make it so that the seller has to pump it in King County. Now, it's a requirement in Pierce County that it has to be pumped and inspected and recorded, and the Pierce County comes out. But in King County, only if the box is checked do they actually have to pump it. They just have to inspect it. And it should be done within 15 days, and it has to be done within the last 12 months. All of these are provisions that the county requires. If you want the buyer's right to attend the inspection, you would check this box. I'll give you a scary story before I end, and I'll end you with a scary story. It's not Halloween. But basically, I had a buyer where I represented the seller and I represented the buyer. They happened to be a landlord and a tenant. It was a good friend of mine. I did it for a flat rate, which I regret after I found out. I included the septic contingency. It was King County. It was property in SeaTac. It was on a septic system. There was issues with the septic system. I did not have the buyer attend the inspection, and I regretted it later because there were issues with the septic inspection. And so basically the pumping, and we had to uncover the septic system again so that the buyer, who happened to be the tenant, could actually see what the issue or the defect was before proceeding. So it added 2 more weeks onto our closing date. A lot of stress on me. The landlord was frustrated. The tenant, who was also the buyer, was frustrated. And it was just because I did not check this box. So I learned, and hopefully you guys will learn from my instance, if you're already throwing this contingency in, why not put number 4 and also check this box that they have the right to attend? Many buyers don't attend the inspection, but in this case, if there was an issue and the buyer didn't attend, like in my case, you could have said, well, you had the right to attend and you did not attend. But in my case, I didn't check the box, so it was a lot of stress on me and in the landlord and the tenant and the whole deal itself. It was a simple checkbox that I didn't check because I thought, oh, they live there. Well, they'll be attending the inspection. Well, they work. Both the husband and the wife worked. They didn't attend the inspection, and they were very frustrated with me. So I don't want you guys to get in a situation like that. You can record this. So if you go through all of these steps, King County does have a recording form that will allow the septic tank pumping and recording and inspection, just like Pierce County, but you do have to prepare it, and you do have to use the 22U and the 22V in a proper way. So if there is a lot of repairs or there's some confusion, you may want to go ahead and record the U and the V between the seller and the buyer so that the next buyer, when you list the home, there's proper documentation that gets recorded on the title report. And Chris can go over that with you if you want on how that's done with using the 22U and the 22V. I'm sure he can put you in touch with a closer who has done those types of recording, so it's done properly. And I'll leave you with that, you guys. Hopefully that was enough to whet your appetite. You should be reading these forms and properly advising on and filling them out properly with your buyers. And then with the seller, again, make sure that you're doing the septic inspection and pumping right away. Don't wait. If you can do it before you list the property, even better, because then you don't have this buyer's right to attend the inspection that will come up and provide a way for them to terminate the contract. We have terminated the contracts on some of these things as well. So if you want to not run the risk of losing a deal, start doing these reports sooner rather than later and bringing it out in the open and being transparent. So with that, I'll let you guys go. Have a great night, and we'll talk to you next week on our next conference call. We're on the conference call 12. We'll wrap it up, the series, and then we'll start our seller series after that. So a lot of you have questions about listings and sellers. We wrap the buyer sequence up, and then we start up with the listing series coming up. So look forward to that, and we'll talk to you next week.
Good night, Rochelle.
Good night. Talk to you guys soon.